sleep. He'd go out, he said, well, I've got to do this, it's got to be right for the next morning, I've got to look right. And he did, by golly. You know, he looked a bit rough sometimes when he'd come in the morning.
I wound up doing second camera, and Joey and I used to go out at 4 o'clock in the morning with the camera and do all these little freaky shots. And Bill and Andy would be sleeping.
When we were making the movie, I would say to Joe, Joe, we'll be lucky if this movie plays on 42nd Street in Texas drive-ins. And Joe would say to me, Bill, you're wrong. He says, what we're making is a happening. And I really believe it was the marketing of Analysis Film Corporation that has helped in making Maniac kind of an icon of the early 80s horror films. They really made it something special. These guys came up with this piece of art that we were just shocked when we saw it. Joe was shocked because he wanted his face on the poster. I think at some point we promised him his face would be on the poster, and his face wasn't on the poster, and they had created this poster with what appears to be a huge erection in the pants. Joe was like, I can't believe this. This is pornographic.
What do you want to tell about Maniac, Joe?
Maniac is a horror movie that came out of the front pages, actually, of the New York Post and Daily News about a child who was abused by his mother, who grew up, as many of them did, and goes around whenever he gets tweaked off, killing women.
I think it's sick, it's perverted, and I just want to stop things like that.
This is violence. This is brutality. This is something that we subjugate people to almost daily.
The most vocal group was the feminists. Newspapers wouldn't run the ads. We had to create different posters for, like, the subways. In places like Los Angeles, there were people painting over the posters.
I'm sitting in my office all day long, and it just faces me, stares at me into the window, and I just can't take this.
I think it was Bill or Andy Garoni, the co-producer, phoned me up and said, did I want to come along and open it in Los Angeles with Joe? And I'd heard by the grapevine that the women's groups were up in arms against this film.
The maniacs who own this theater were showing the movie that shows how women get stalked and killed every day.
So I thought, my golly, I'm not going to fly into that and face the wrath of the American women. So I chickened out.
If you don't like a lot of blood and gore, don't come and see it. But if you're interested in horror movies...
I'm not crazy about a lot of violence on the screen, unless it's done with a certain amount of taste.
Well, there's more violence on TV news than there is in the movie.
It was quite a brutal film, quite a raw film, of which many have sort of come along after that. One of its first. I can't say I liked the film, but it was very powerful.
Judd Hamilton, Caroline Munro's husband, was responsible for bringing a large portion of the money for Maniac from investors. And when the investors got their money back, plus profits, within 6 months of the completion of the film, they looked at Judd Hamilton as being some kind of a movie genius.
Because of the success of Maniac, we thought, well, it seems to be quite a winning formula, the two of us together, and we like to tour together.
It's always been that way for me. I just want to tell you about the film.
Judd went to them and said, look, we want to do kind of another Maniac with Joe Spinell and Caroline Munro. Give us $500,000, we'll go make the movie. Judd took the $500,000, hired David Winters, and went to the south of France, to Cannes, to shoot this movie. I don't even think they had a script.
And I hadn't seen him for maybe 3 or 6 months. And I get a phone call, and he says, hey, darling, do you have your passport? And I said, yeah. He said, we're going to Europe. And that was the beginning.
It was done very impromptu because we were during the film festival and a lot of the scenes couldn't be set up at all. So we had to just go with what was happening and make a lot of ad libs going on.
cut, print.
Joe brought himself to that. I mean, he designed the set, he designed his bedroom, designed it, he put every picture up the way he wanted it. He designed the color of his room. He knew exactly what this person would need as this kind of obsessed fan with this woman. When we were there filming, it was extraordinary. He really did party a lot then, during that time.
We were staying at the Carlton Hotel. And then I get a call near the end of the shoot from Judd Hamilton. He says, come down to the lobby of the Carlton. So I said, well, what's up? He said, we have to leave the Carlton. I said, well, I know. He says, tonight. I said, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. He said, I know, but we have to leave. I said, why? He said, we owe them 240,000 francs. I said, well, pay them. He said, well, we don't have the money. He said, and Joe spent it. It must have been 6:30 in the morning, sun was coming up. We're walking down the most famous boulevard in the world, all disheveled, and a car passes us and starts giving us kisses. We started throwing bottles at him and screaming, and going, you motherfucker, you know, you cocksucker, stop the car. Needless to say, we grabbed the cab, we got to the plane, we got to Switzerland, and we wound up staying in a castle called Chateau de Pelly.
Definitely not as tight a production. It was a long production. I know I was absolutely exhausted. We went to Cannes and we went to Geneva, and I think some of it was shot in New York.
I understand the final cost of the last horror movie was like something like $2 million, 4 times the amount of the original budget of the film.
You know, I'd heard stories about how this guy ran up, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of bills. And he used to tell me, everybody robs me. They don't pay me good money. They use me for a couple of days and they pay me short dough. But I did have a little movie. It was called Hollywood Harry. I said, hey, Joe, now, nobody's ever used you as a good guy, but I made it with $125,000, not much. And I said, you know what? Everybody was getting low budget minimum, including me. But the amount that I had left over was $11,400 and something. And I said, Joe, and I'm going to give it all to you. And he said, I'll take it. And to his credit, he never charged a penny that wasn't, that we hadn't agreed on. He was a straight shooter. A little nuts, but straight shooter.
A dog does not shit like that. Any actor studio member would know this.
After the final day of shooting, everybody, the cast and crew, and everybody came over and we had a pool party. Joe had no bathing suit.
We're all, I don't know, Joe, you know, and we were all a little bit afraid that he might come out naked. And that was a legitimate fear. So we're all sitting around by the pool, and out comes Joe. He had a Glad trash bag, and he took some scissors and he cut the ends off like this, and he slipped into it like a bathing suit. And it was basically a Glad bag diaper. And he comes strutting out like he's on the runway at the spring fashion show for bathing suits. And as he was in the pool, the water was filling into the Glad bag, and he came out of the pool, and it was just a gigantic orb around him, and little by little the water was coming out the legs, and he was just in his glory. That's my favorite image of Joe.
Maniac is here, folks.
The drinking and drugs escalated after we finished Maniac. He was really getting bad after that. I think Maniac might have facilitated some of his behavior. He owned a sizable portion of the film, and profits were coming in on the film within 6 months of our completing it. It offered him the money to go and do stuff that, you know, that he might not have done.
He got harder. He lost, you know, the innocence and all the fun.
He didn't know when to stop. And I would say, Joe, pull it back. And he would tell me, you're not my mother, leave me alone. I was getting tired of the same shit. Yeah, I had to take a break from it, you know. He sort of got mad at me because standing rap amongst friends was, Luke took a woman and he's not my boyfriend anymore, you know.
When we did Vigilante, he was starting to become unreliable. The drinking and the drugs had started to escalate.
Listen to me, pal. You screw around with me and your ass will be with legal aid. And that spick friend of yours will be raw meat in jail.
He was becoming increasingly more difficult to get him to show up. In fact, on Vigilante, he didn't show up one morning. Andy Garrone had to go searching for him, doing detective work from the bar that he was in, what girl did he pick up. Joe's mother was one of the extras in the courtroom. When Joe finally did show up, she yelled at Joe when he came in, you owe Bill and Andy an apology, and you owe everybody here an apology. And Joe was going, yeah, Ma, okay, Ma, I understand. Okay, I was wrong. And then Joe apologizes to the whole cast and crew.
Your Honor, my client is willing to plead guilty to the assault if the felony charge against him is dropped.
I used to take him up to my house, had a little place on a lake in the Pocono Mountains, Pennsylvania. The deal was he could come if he didn't drink and brought no booze. I would go through his bag and check his pockets, but he'd find a way around that. He used to go to my neighbors, and get a shot here and there. Yeah.
One day we're out there and we're waiting on the set. And there's no Spinell. We're waiting on the set, and my partner turns to me and says, you're gonna have to go over to the hotel. He's over there, I know he is. I go up to the manager and he said, Mr. Spinell, please, sir, he's in the cocktail lounge. We have guests here from out of town. Could you do something? I walked in the cocktail lounge and he was sitting there very nicely, very composed, having his 50th drink in his mother's dress. He had his mother's dress on, and he had painted his face. It looked like a Picasso painting. And he said, what's wrong? It's my mother's dress. I like it.
Shortly after his brother and mother passed away, I saw even a further decline, somebody who I didn't want to even be around because he was just so out of it.
I stayed with Joe in his apartment after his mother had died. Every time we'd walk in the apartment after we were out for the day or the night or whatever, he'd say, hi, Ma, we're home.
Hi, Ma.
When she passed on, it really did affect him. It really, really did. Him and I were sort of away from each other at that point in time.
I truly believe it's something that he could never cure himself of the pain.
If I wasn't a block away and, really more or less took care of him, it was really tough.
Joe was a hemophiliac, yet he would get into a fight at a bar and break a bottle to threaten somebody with the bottle. I saw a suicidal decline in Joe.
He was really getting sick. He was at the hospital. I went to visit him, and he got out of bed, and he asked me for cigarettes. I said, Joe, you're in the hospital. You can't smoke, and you're very sick. And he says, no, let's take a walk. And we walked into the hall by the elevator, and somebody came up out of the elevator, asked for a cigarette, and there he was, puffing away. He really didn't care. He knew he couldn't drink, he was drinking. He wasn't supposed to smoke, he was smoking.
I don't think life meant as much to him after his mother died.
We were doing a movie called Mr. Robbie, which was to become Maniac 2. I would pick up Joe every day at his home, drive him into the city to my office.
I never wanted to do a sequel to Maniac. Joe did. So I did not stand in the way of Joe going and doing a sequel.
I call up Joe about 10:30 at this bar, and I just say, hello, I'm looking for a guy named Joe Spinell. Is he there? The bartender says, hold on. So Joe Spinell gets on the phone, and we just start talking. I told him how much I loved him in Maniac, and I was a fan from the other films I'd seen him pop up in. So he says, let's meet. I said, okay. He says, all right, come in tonight. I go into Manhattan, and I meet him at this bar. He's at that point just agreed to do the film, and that's when I realized that we didn't have financing, we didn't have anything. All we had was Joe Spinell. Joe Spinell was a very sensitive guy, and he really, he loved people, he really loved women. And he was telling me that when Maniac came out, a lot of women's groups really hated the film. He was really hurt by that. So he pitched me the idea of this kiddie show host, this guy who runs a kiddie show. He dresses up in clown face, but he gets these letters from abused kids that are being beaten and tortured by their parents. So his idea was to have this guy, Mr. Robbie, go out and kill the abusive parents. It was perfect. My theory is that Joe wanted to be the only real actor in the film because everybody that was cast pretty much was what they were at the bar. The cook in the film is the cook at the bar. Joe would meet people on the street and cast them. And then I'd get these actresses coming up to me and saying, well, I'm the new co-star. I met Joe last night at this bar, and he told me I'm in the